afternoon session is a Shellfish Management block. I'm sorry. Yes, there's Shellfish Management block. And the first speaker is Dr. Tora Johnson. And Tora Johnson is a social scientist and associate professor at the University of Maine in Machias. And she serves as the director of the GIS laboratory. Her research focuses on helping coastal communities make important decisions about natural resources in the Down East region.
Hi everybody, thanks for, I'll try to not put you to sleep after lunch. So I'm here to talk with you about some work that we've been doing. At the GIS laboratory, we do a lot of work helping communities in the coastal region in lots of different ways. And one of the things that we've been hearing from a number of sources, including from the shellfish harvesters and folks folks on shellfish committees and folks inside DMR, that there were problems with harvesters determining what areas were safe and legal to harvest. And so we acquired funding from the NASA Maine Space Grant Consortium, as well as the Maine Coastal Program, and that funding came through the Washington County Council of Governments that allowed us to explore this question and ideally move forward. So I'm here to report on the results, the preliminary results of this work. So the question for this research, the main questions were how well did DMR closure notices and maps serve harvesters in their efforts to determine where it's safe and legal to harvest. Also, how can they be improved? What do harvesters need in those closure notices and maps to more effectively and precisely determine what's safe and legal to harvest? And what sort of access do harvesters have to technology? So what we did in this work was to begin with interviews with key stakeholders, so key people involved with shell fisheries who were familiar with some of the issues around maps and closure notices, talked with them about their concerns, and then we used that information to create a survey. We also did a review of how other states do their closure notices and how they map the closures and how they communicate to harvesters. So the survey we conducted over the summer and fall, and many of you probably in the room responded to that survey. Thank you for your feedback. The population that we sent the survey to included all licensed harvesters in the state, as well as all farmers and dealers in the state. We also used a stakeholder list provided by Dr. Bridie DeGreevy, and we also sort of broadcast an invitation to take the survey to the whole DMR shellfish list, stakeholder list. And we did a combination of internet and mail surveys, and it was pretty lengthy survey, 26 questions. So a few things to note about the survey and what we got back. So we sent out a combination of email surveys directly to 2,000 people. I don't know what the number is on the DMR list, and there's probably some overlap between those folks. But 2,000 got a direct email invitation, and then 500 folks on the licensee list did not have email addresses listed, so we sent them paper surveys. One thing to notice is that we had a lot of bounces, so the number, typically when you have a list of people who have just in the past year given somebody their address and you send them an invitation, the number of bounce backs is very low, 1 or 2%, and we had a relatively higher number than that. We did receive 294 complete responses and about 54 partial responses, and so valid responses in total was about 350. We We did find that there were lots of duplicate addresses. That's interesting for one particular reason that's important here, which is that many of the there were dozens and dozens in the licensee list where they were going to the same address. And we learned from some of the folks there that there are harvesters using the address of their buyer as their mailing address for their license. So that makes it a little challenging to reach harvesters. We also have some evidence that there's some literacy issues, and we think that that was part of a relatively low response rate, not a bad response rate from social science perspective, but we did have 3 harvesters call us and say, I don't write, I don't really read, but I want to answer your survey and I want you to hear what I have to say. And we interviewed them instead and recorded their responses. We also had a couple of people respond to the survey saying, I don't read or write, but my friend is filling this out for me. So there's an understanding that literacy might have stood in the way of probably more harvesters than we heard from there. It was interesting to note that many of the harvesters, those harvesters went that extra mile to make sure that we heard their voices, and that was pretty important. So just so you see what the roles are, we heard from 182 professional harvesters, and you can see the distribution. The number here adds up to more than the 350, just because many people had dual roles. Some people were both a harvester and were on their local shellfish committee or something like that. And here's the age distribution. As you can see, an older lot. And income distribution was all over the map. Incidentally, if you want to study this data more closely, I do have a link to this presentation that I'll show at the end as well. And this is a really important result, the year's harvesting. So we did have about a little over a quarter of our respondents had been harvesting or farming, and now we're looking only at harvesters and farmers. They'd only been doing this for 5 or fewer years, but the majority had been doing it for over 10 years. So when we get into the results here, remember that over half of our sample was very experienced. So now, from going forward from here, we're just going to look at professional harvesters, professional farmers, shellfish committee members, and subsistence or recreational harvesters. So the data going forward is just those folks. So just the people who actually literally have to take clams out of the mud and sell them for food, right? So we asked them how they determine, and this was something that DMR really was interested to know, is which of the various ways that DMR uses to try and help harvesters know what's open and closed, which of the various ways were they using? We were actually kind of surprised to find that about 2/3 of the sample of the professional harvesters used the hotline. And that was also surprising considering the complaints that the feedback that they gave us on the hotline on the survey. And the map descriptions were very important too. Notice though that email notices for professional harvesters were way down on the list, right? So in terms of what they use every time or most times, that was important. The other thing that was also crucial is how many use fellow harvesters most or all of the time. And that was something we knew to put there because we had heard anecdotally, both through interviews as well as just feedback that we'd gotten, that we'd heard that there was a subset of harvesters that were relying specifically on other harvesters to provide provide them with closure information. Then we asked these folks if in the past year, how often they had trouble determining which areas were safe and legal to harvest shellfish. And as you can see, even professional harvesters, and remember over half of this sample was very experienced, over half of them said that they had trouble. Notably, of the recreational and subsistence harvesters, almost 2/3 reported having that kind of trouble. Cole has informed me that the only folks who have reported health effects from biotoxins, is that true, were recreational harvesters. So there may be a correlation there, and so that presents some significant concern. Also, we used local Shellfish Committee members as a sort of proxy for, selecting folks who should be the most informed and the most able to determine what was closed and what was open. And they had just as much trouble as the professional harvesters as a group. And so this suggested that likely there was some difficulty in getting the information to harvesters. And so some of these are some of the typical comments that we received when we asked folks to comment on the trouble that they've had. And I'll let you, I'm not going to read these to you, but they ran the gamut from written, talking about the written descriptions. I'll give you a second to glance through these. And by and large, the complaints about the written descriptions were that they were really difficult to decipher, really hard to understand. And then the maps that accompany the written descriptions were, as we saw, they're used more often in trying to determine which areas were closed. But we have received a large number of complaints. The vast majority of the concerns that folks expressed related to the maps. And we'll take a look at some of these concerns. So the issues had to do with the content of the map, so the stuff that was in the map, the scale of the map, and the amount of detail in the map, as we'll see. So let's take a look at an example. So this is my backyard, Machias Bay, and this is just a randomly selected map. Notice that there are no town boundaries, there's no roads. It's difficult to even determine exactly which points of land and reference points are referred to. And this was, we understand that the maps evolved as, a legacy from a time when making maps was much harder than it is now, that we've sort of been doing things the same old way for some time. Another issue that may come into play, one more thing I wanted to say about this, which is that the scale of the map is fixed, right? So these maps come in a PDF format. It's set to be, if you were to print it out, it would come on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper for all of Machias Bay like this. There's no zooming in. There's no way to recombine it with other information, right? It's sort of fixed the way it is. And so scale was an issue that came out of many of the comments, right? I can't tell at this scale, essentially, the harvester said, what is going on, where that line is. Another issue, so 4.5% of our sample, which is slightly less than the the general population, but 4.5% of our sample said that they are colorblind. And so any red or green symbols on the map would turn to essentially gray. So here's how it would be seen with color blindness. This is probably less of an issue for these maps, but folks have been testing web-based maps where there's lots of red overlaying green, especially on an aerial background, and that would make it difficult to interpret. Moving on to the hotline, a couple of things, common complaints on the hotline. The message is too long. Many people said it was hard to hear, that you have to wait and listen to it again in order to hear it, and make sure it's silent in the room, that sort of thing. And then also another thing that folks, we didn't even ask about this actually, but we should have, but it did come up in a lot of the comments, which was it's hard to find. You need two maps, right? You need the biotoxin closures and the pollution closures, and they're two separate parts of the website. So that gave us a sense that, maybe simplifying the path to the maps on the website and maybe finding ways to combine the maps might make sense in the future. Okay, so we asked folks, okay, if you could have any map, whatever it would be, what would it look like? And we asked them about things like format and content and so forth. So when we asked about their preferred format, those PDFs are still pretty popular, but an interactive map, whether it's for a computer or for a smartphone, was also useful. There certainly were a number of folks who responded who didn't think any of those things were useful at all. Some of them just said no. And it's important to remember that small number of folks still need to figure out where it's safe and legal to harvest. But we did get the message that a large number of folks would appreciate an interactive map. And here's what the distribution looked like for divided up in those groups. And I show this primarily so that you can see that those recreational harvesters really like a downloadable interactive map or something for a smartphone. So there is some variation, and that the professional harvesters were a little more interested in a web-based map for computer. There's a lot of information on this, but essentially this is the features that folks would find most useful in their order of usefulness. So current biotoxin and bacterial closures were considered the most useful. And then of course the extra detail that many of the folks in their comments had asked for. We were sort of surprised that a nautical chart boundary might be helpful, but I know finding those red buoys, which are often referenced in there would be helpful. And so I'll let you glance through this. Now, we also wanted to know, okay, if we're going to make web-based maps or maps to be for you to look at out on your phone, what would you want? What do you use? And this was a really important part of the survey. So one thing that was interesting is the vast majority of the folks who responded are using a smartphone, and a surprising number of them use only a smartphone to access the internet. So their only way they access the internet is a smartphone. So that's an important consideration. There's also a number who didn't use any technology at all, which I'll get to in a second. here's the same information in a little bit of a different format. And here you can see that 72% of these folks are using a smartphone at least once a day. And only, and it's less than half that use a computer once a day, actually, in total. So some important takeaways from our, from looking at technology. It's not, okay, making a map that is zoomable and works for smartphones is gonna fix everything, right? Because most people use smartphones, but about 20% don't ever use it. About half use a computer daily, it's slightly less than half, but the other half don't, right? And 10% access the internet only with a smartphone, and about a little over 6% never use any technology. I suspect, and I didn't anticipate this, I suspect that that 6%, it has a lot of overlap with the folks who are using other harvesters to determine what's closed. And this was a typical comment. I don't use technology, I talk to people. I'm only doing this because my friend is asking me the question. And we had a few comments like that on the survey that indicated, no technology. And some of the folks who called us and asked us to interview said, I don't want to touch the computer. I'm not interested in the computer. So the lesson that we sort of take away from this is there are a few crucial issues. So first of all, I think there's a general consensus that that's too much uncertainty, that we need to be much more certain when public health is concerned with regard to closures. We also have heard, we heard some of this in the interview research, both directly from harvesters, but we also heard sort of secondhand that there are, for instance, areas, situations where harvesters are just unsure where the line is, and if they're being careful, they're harvesting very short of that line, leaving areas that could be harvested unharvested because they're unsure where to stop. We heard several anecdotes where harvesters said, one person said, I went down to the flat and nobody was there, so I figured it was closed, right? And that was sort of one way that they determined. And we didn't hear, but presumably there are some folks who go down there, they don't see anybody, they're like, I guess they're all home and harvest. There's no way to know, right? There's uncertainty. We also heard about people who harvested and later found that the flats were closed and had to adapt from there and lost the time and the harvest itself. So that would suggest that we need to do better, and that improving the tools that the harvesters have, especially diminishing the amount of uncertainty that we have for the professional harvesters and addressing the large amount of uncertainty that we have for recreational and subsistence harvesters is really crucial. And then also we need to be ready to serve multiple audiences. So it wasn't, I sort of had this fantasy when we started doing this that it'd be like, oh, they all have smartphones, it'll be great, we'll just do a smartphone thing and it'll all fix it, right? No. We need to come up with a plan to reach a diverse audience, right? We need to reach the folks who access the internet only on their smartphones, and we know we can get them there, right? And have maps that they can use that give them meaningful information on a little tiny screen. But we also need to work out ways to reach folks who are identifying what areas are closed right now through simply word of mouth, right? And so web-based maps, which is something DMR has been testing, and then in our lab we've been mocking up possible web-based solutions for this, seem like a really good possibility. And they're going to need to be adaptable. It's not something we'll probably easily be able to do tomorrow, but they'll need to be adaptable to multiple audiences. And then we'll also need some kind of communication plan to reach those folks who will never see those maps. So what do we do now? What do we do with this information? So following this work and compiling this information, I'll be putting together a report which I'll provide to Cole and her staff at the Bureau of Public Health. And we're looking for funding now to move forward to provide DMR with the resources to put together the tools that we need to improve communication. One of the crucial elements going forward is going to be input and help from harvesters. And so please, I'm hoping today I'm going to leave a little time for us to chat today and answer questions and collect some input. But also we'll be asking the harvesters all across the state to test things out. So hey, try this map out and tell us what, see if you can break it. Does this, give you the information you need, etc. And also for coming up for ideas, how do we best reach, the older harvester who has no access to technology? How do we best reach harvesters who can't read? That's going to be a really crucial piece. And then I think probably even a tougher nut to crack is going to be, how do we describe the closures in words that make them a little more accessible? So if you'd like to explore the data from this survey a little more closely and explore this information, you can access the slideshow here. And if you have your cell phone with you and you have a QR code reader, if you're one of those cell phone people, you can scan this this QR code and it'll take you right to this slideshow. Okay. And so I think I left plenty of time for questions. Yeah, great. Yes.
I just have one question. I find I can use the thing I go online also to the phone before I go harvesting. I call the hotline, and
Yes.
I have gone on the website and saw the maps, and I thought they're adequate. But they opened up a cove, and this was on Deer Isle, and they opened up the cove, and I thought, well, I've never been there, so I'll go out there. But I've noticed that when they open up these coves, they don't go out and take down the sign that says it's closed. That's a physical thing that, if you're going to open open a cove, you should actually take down the sign. I know you have to put it back up if it closes again, but still, it does seem like it's something that makes confusion if you don't take the sign down.
Yeah. Actually, so in the survey, signage was one of the things, I didn't include it in the survey, but we had several comments where people said there was a sign, there was a map on a telephone pole, I didn't know what to believe, there were people harvesting, but I didn't recognize them, all sorts of, yeah. And I think, I'm not one of the managers, but I think one of the issues is that, different towns have different protocols for putting signage up, and that is probably going to have to be part of it, and that's really important feedback for us going forward, is making sure that's part of our communication plan going forward, is when we're posting information, A, how do we structure that information so it's really usable, and B, how do we make sure it's current? And people did mention that signs weren't current, right? I don't know if this sign meant, the flat was really in this, open or closed, whatever the sign said. So that's a good point. Yes, back there.
The towns don't put up the closure signs, the Marine Patrol offices put up closure signs.
Some of the, and I don't know, some of the comments said, somebody from the Shellfish Commission was putting up the sign. Yeah, so I think there's a combination of different signage things going on. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? So I would like to ask the harvesters in the room, are the results ringing true not only about your own experience, but of experience that you have of other harvesters that that are in your community? Yes?
What was the question?
Does this ring true, the results? Are you seeing a variety of different, are you seeing, first of all, some trouble figuring out what's open and closed and where the line is?
We only have 4 licensed harvesters in town. Most of them know when the things close or not. We do have one that probably does not have any access to any online or anything.
Yep. And you all sort of take care of that person, make sure they know?
For the most part, we need to sit to word of mouth, someone stops and tells them that
Yep.
it's closed.
Yep. Great. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
I'm a dealer down east in Costco, and a lot of what you've said, rings true about literacy, or Jim Bob told me it was okay to go down there.
Yeah.
And I've been to court for only one marine violation, but the day I sat there in Machias court, I realized, listening to the full docket of everyone's infractions or whatnot, that it seemed like a lot of people were there and, were served a summons and whatnot. And I don't think they knew that they were in the wrong area.
Yep.
As well as guys losing days' work, because they heard from so-and-so's girlfriend that it's a red tide or it's a rain tide. In fact, a lot of harvesters don't know. I've heard them say to me, it didn't rain that much, it can't be a red tide right now. And so, what's the difference between the two? And so I don't see that, the maps are nice, the hotline stinks, because you sit there, if you're in Eastport, Maine, you're going to start at Kittery. I mean, all you'd have to do is push 1 if you're mid-coast, push 3 if you're down east, and so on. So there's lots of stuff like that I think could really enable this industry and get us to move ahead. And instead of frustrating potential harvesters, encouraging them and breaking down those barriers. Just the clam tag itself, it's a piece of tieback that no one in their right mind could ever write their name and license number on and anything like that. I mean, it's just really tough unless you have a brand new Sharpie. So, yeah, it's not wet, huh? That's a tough one right there. So we got to a point where we printed on like a zebra printer everyone's own tags with their name on it, with their license on it, and also the codes. And we came up with an abbreviation for every code. Like Birch Point was BP and Leighton Point was LP. That way the digger, if he wasn't able to write, he could just circle. Circle the town, circle the number of pounds, all those sorts of things. Because I found that a lot of harvesters would have their friend or their girlfriend or their wife fill out their tags for them in advance. And if they went down to such and such a cove and it was too windy, they decided to jump to another cove, they got a false tag. And they're bringing their product in. So there's lots of things like that. But I think in your research, I wouldn't worry about the harvesters that don't have smartphone or internet access. I think if you're going to build it, keep it simple. And those harvesters can still rely on the other person on the flat who does have, and it just seems like you ought to be able to, just like when you're going to go somewhere and you enter your zip code to find your closest Walmart, you ought to be able to just tap on a map and it will say, you dummy, this is closed, get out of there fast. Don't drop your gear, But it seems like we ought to be able in this day and age to really break down those barriers. But it's good work. It's very desperately needed.
Thank you. Yeah, and the technology now, it does exist where we've done a mock-up of an app that allows you literally to tap a little thing that says, show me where I am. And there are the polygons that show this is closed for this reason, this is closed for that reason, this is open. And so what we need now is the resources to produce it and test it. Great. Yes?
So my question is how
how big a nut is this to try to?
Well, we are in the process of submitting a grant that I think would get us there for 40,000. So it's not a huge nut. It's very doable. Anybody else?
Great. I killed it.
You killed it.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.